Hi, I'm Brother Jake, and welcome to Part 4 of Brother Jake Defends the Book of Mormon. Well, let's start with a quick recap. In Part 1, I talked about some supposed anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, and then in Part 2, I talked about some other supposed anachronisms, and then in Part 3, I talked about some other supposed anachronisms, but if you want to know more about what they are and why they're totally not a big deal at all, just go watch those videos, okay? Because I'm getting sick of all these freaking haters coming up and saying, what about horses, and what about Deuteronomy Isaiah, and a million other The Book of Mormon is amazing. Okay? Amazing. You think you're so smart? You try and do better. Joseph Smith cranked out the Book of Mormon in 65 days. Start to finish, plates to paper, 65 days. Well, not 65 days from when he first saw the plates. Moroni appeared to Joseph Smith in 1823 and told him about the plates and showed him where they were, but then he had to wait for another 4 years until he was ready to go get them. But it was 65 days from when they started translating. Well, not from the first time they started translating, because it was going really slow at the beginning, and then they got these 116 pages ready, but then Martin Harris lost them, and then God told Joseph he couldn't translate them for a while as a punishment, and it was this whole thing. So, 65 days of translating work from the second scribe. Actually, Martin Harris was his second scribe. First, it was his wife Emma, and then Martin Harris, and then things started really to take off with Oliver Cowdery, so third scribe. So, 65 days from the start of his third scribe, start to finish. And in that time, he dictated a 513-page epic tale teeming with complex storylines and cultures and conflicts. And guess what? It's all internally consistent. It's a sprawling story, but somehow he managed to keep all the details straight. I mean, he had a couple of hiccups. In the original manuscript, apparently, King Mosiah kind of popped back into the picture for a bit after he had supposedly died, but give it a rest, all right? What is this supposed to be, the most correct book on earth or something? My point is, in spite of all the complexities of the narrative, it shows a whole bunch of internal consistency, all from the mind of an uneducated farm boy who was dictating, and we know he was dictating and not reading because there wasn't any light that it can get into the hat, over a 2-ish month period from the start of the third scribe. And he was really uneducated, just totally ignorant and backwoods and completely, mediocre. I mean, not completely mediocre. He was a prophet of God, and apparently he was pretty good at, talking his whole life. But that was probably just because God blessed him with intelligence after he was chosen as a prophet. His wife, his first wife, Emma, even said that Joseph Smith could neither write nor dictate a coherent and well-worded letter, let alone dictating the Book of Mormon. When she was acting as his scribe, she said that when they get, interrupted, he'd just start right where they left off without even checking. Isn't that amazing? And he was only in his early 20s. Most professional writers can't pump out a 513-pager in 65 days from the beginning of their third attempt, and they can read. And that's just talking about the length, not to mention the content. How could Joseph Smith have known everything he would need to know to write it? About Hebraisms and all the chiasmus and all that other stuff. And I know each of these has its issues, blah, blah, blah. But what about the prophecies? The Book of Mormon is filled with really accurate prophecies about the promised land, from the arrival of Columbus and the Pilgrims to the formation of the U.S., to the translation of the Book of Mormon, to... Actually, they kind of get vague from right around the early 19th century, which was the time when Joseph Smith happened to be translating it. But come on, the Book of Mormon even prophesies that it would be brought forth by Joseph, son of Joseph. How could Joseph Smith Jr. have known that he was going to be the one translating the Book of Mormon? Seriously, though, what other explanation for the Book of Mormon's existence can there possibly be? I mean, sure, I guess some people out there could argue that Joseph Smith did it by riffing on stories in his cultural context, like the King James Bible and the sermons of the Second Great Awakening and the View of the Hebrews, which was a popular book in the early 19th century Northeast that talks about a fictitious group of Israelites that sails through the Americas and colonizes it, and remixing them into a new story in the same way as pretty much all other works of recorded fiction ever. And yes, that view might seem to give a really simple explanation of where stuff like King James errors and Deuteronomy Isaiah and horses and steel and all the other anachronisms came from, but you got to consider the other side of the argument, man. How did he do it? How about this? We'll weigh the evidence, okay? We'll call this side of the scale the Book of Mormon is fake and you're a dumb idiot that has given his life to a massive fraud and we're all on a slow march to eternal oblivion and death side. And we'll call the other side the Book of Mormon is true and I'm not a sucker and my life has meaning because I'll be resurrected after I die so I can live forever in super VIP heaven with my family doing cool God stuff side. On this side, you have all the horses and wheat and steel and swords and DNA and Deuteronomy Isaiah and whatever else we talked about. And on the other side, you have the fact that there was just a freaking 24-year-old backwoods kid with his head in a hat spitting out this stuff in 65 days after his third try. And you can't ignore that. I couldn't pull that off. Could you? I doubt it. I doubt anyone could. I mean, Sure, there have been people like Pearl Curran, who was this uneducated Midwestern housewife in the 19th century that just all of a sudden started spouting off all these poems and novels and stuff that she said were channeled thoughts of some 16th century British woman, which she did so well in front of a ton of witnesses that people thought she was for real for like decades afterward until they found some anachronisms in the language she was using. But that's way different than the Book of Mormon. First of all, she used a Ouija board to do all that channeling, which we know are tools of the devil, while Joseph Smith used a seer stone, which are totally legit. And anyway, she was obviously some sort of super genius. Are you saying that Joseph Smith was a genius then? You're just really stretching here, man. Seriously. And yes, at some point some of you might be thinking, but the likelihood that one person possessed exceptional intelligence seems more plausible than an entire civilization existing with revolutionary technology and agriculture for 1,000 years on the American continent and then disappearing without a trace. But do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I'm some sort of idiot that I would believe in something that's obviously not true? There are smart Mormons, educated Mormons who are not dodos and went to pretty good schools. Mormons with PhDs. They even publish really scholarly articles with scholarly footnotes in scholarly outlets like the Maxwell Institute and Farms. Wait, that one doesn't exist anymore, never mind. And Mormon Interpreter, articles that are rigorously peer-reviewed by other Mormons with PhDs. Are you calling all them stupid, dumb little Mormons getting duped for your amusement? Is that it? Huh? You know what? I don't need to do this. You know why? Burden of proof. It's not up to me to prove that the Book of Mormon is an ancient record. The Book of Mormon exists, all right? Millions of wonderful, educated people all over the world believe it's an ancient record. And if you think it's not historical, it's up to you to disprove it. You have the burden of proof. Oh, and by the way, if you're saying it wasn't a miraculous translation, you also have to explain exactly how it was produced to really disprove it. So go ahead. You got that little confession letter from Joseph Smith admitting he made it up, tucked up your sleeve? Go ahead, whip it out. Let's see it. Because otherwise, no dice, pal. You have the burden of proof. Now, some people might say I'm misusing the concept of the burden of proof, since by that same argument, literally any text claiming to be historical by any group of people would have to be accepted as historical by default, since in order to disprove it, you have to prove a negative, which, like I talked about in part 2, is logically impossible. But look, I'm tired. Okay, and while I realize I spent the last 4 freaking videos making intellectual arguments defending the Book of Mormon, in the end, it's not about that at all. It's about belief. I believe the Book of Mormon is historical because I feel like God has told me that it is in my heart, and I love reading it. It brings God's peace in my life, and if that's not enough for you, fine. You can go ahead believing that God doesn't speak to humanity through prophets anymore, and that the Bible is the entire Word of God, and after death you just cease to exist, or you go to some kind of cute little heaven where you sit around on clouds stroking harps and not living as families and not creating worlds and not doing cool God stuff. Knock yourself out. But I believe that Joseph Smith wasn't a liar, and I believe I'm not a sucker that got fooled by some sort of fraud. And you know what? I wrote a little song about that too.
Yeah, haters hate but cannot see. Chiasmus doesn't grow on trees. And if so many PhDs find reasons to believe, then so can we. Now some say Joseph wove the tale from the culture that did prevail. But you try writing in Hebraic speech and see how many come hear you preach. Sure, when you place it on the scale, you may think the book has failed beneath the weight of its own claims and lack of Nephitish remains. But if you find that doubts persist, threatening to drag you down, know that many learned people are on your side, so don't you frown. Yeah, haters hate but cannot see. Chiasmus doesn't grow on trees. And if so many PhDs find reasons to believe, then so can we. Just focus on what you will lose if all this ends up being true. Never-ending family ties and resurrection when I die. You may say it's a mistake to put my faith into a fake, but when you think of what you'll say when you stand at at the pearly gates, and they say that you can't come in because your soul is stained with sin, and you will shout and weep and wail and gnash your teeth to no avail. And Jesus says, well, that is rough, because you can't do cool God stuff. Your haters hate but cannot see. Chiasmus doesn't grow on trees. All these freaking PhDs find reasons to believe, find ways that they can see a path to certainty. Then so can we.